Shades of Immortality, Book Number 1, Painter of the Dead, written by Catherine Butzen, narrated by Kelly Hardy. Prologue. The security guard sat filling out a timesheet when the door opened behind him. "You took your damn time, Jay," he began. It wasn't Jay. A handful of gray powder blinded him, and his deep, hacking cough cut off his next words. The powder clung to him, filling his lungs, its sickly sweet scent overpowering. In the space of 3 breaths, he was unconscious. Black and white monitors lined the small room, displaying feeds from all over the Oriental Institute. The man double-checked them. Nobody was about to disturb him, especially not Jay, who was sleeping off his own dose under a table in the employee cafeteria. The man plugged in a small laptop and made a few artistic tweaks to the security system. The powder's effects would wear off within 15 minutes, and the guards wouldn't remember a thing about their blackouts. Not enough time for a full-scale burglary, but more than enough to make the changes he needed. He typed quickly, tongue between his teeth. Patience, and time management were the keys. They always had been, but modern technology required a little more patience than he was used to when doing this kind of work. In 2 weeks, the new collection would arrive. Once the Institute actually had the items in hand, its new procedures would go into effect, and the system would be virtually unbreachable. Unless, of course, he had first arranged a way in for himself. Behind him, Hank snorted in his sleep. The man smiled. Falling asleep on the night shift was regrettable, but not impossible. Besides, how much could have gone wrong in 15 minutes? There. With a final keystroke, he sent his bundle of codes spiraling off into the system. When he came back, his door would be ready for him, and the servants would be there in the darkness, waiting to answer his call, just like they should have been a long, long time ago. Chapter 1. I gave the priest the whole story, reminding him of his promise of silence, and asked him what I should do. He said to me, "If you are insane, pray for healing. If you are telling the truth, begin a diary. No gods will help you in this." Excerpt from the Steen Papyrus, circa 1400 BCE, a fragment. Transforming the main hall of a natural history museum into a party venue wasn't easy, but the planning committee had done a heck of a job. Long strands of lights hung from the second-floor balconies in glittering loops. The statues of the muses near the ceiling had been cleaned and polished, and flickering lamps in cobalt and gold shades lit up the dozen round tables arranged in front of the central dais. A pack of skeletal Struthiomimus stood proudly on their pedestal, their black fiberglass bones touched with glossy yellow-white in the lamplight. Behind them loomed the massive figure of Little John, a near-complete Tyrannosaurus unfazed by the party going on under his huge feet. Dozens of guests circulated in black ties, their laughter and conversation muted slightly by the sheer size of the hall. Theodora Speer glanced down, checking her hands and dress one last time for flecks of paint. She had worn a plastic smock while working and had checked herself over when she'd finished up, but being surrounded by so many well-dressed people had started her worrying again. Paint stains, like spinach in your teeth, tended to be invisible until the moment of maximum embarrassment. Nothing. Good. She smoothed down her eggshell white dress and tried not to look nervous. Waiters circulated, carrying trays of champagne and, in a nod to the upcoming festive season and the chilly November weather, hot cider. Theo took a glass of cider and carefully sipped as she glanced around, trying to spot her coworkers. Every year the museum gave a party for its most generous donors, and certain staffers were selected to attend. Their job was to make friendly conversation with the people who funded their work, and, hopefully, to keep the donations flowing for another year. Theo wasn't entirely sure why the art department had been tapped for the job this time. The people who designed murals, posters, and resellable pop art for the gift shop didn't usually rub elbows with the paleontologists and doctors. "Penny for your thoughts?" Theo jumped and reflexively clutched the glass to prevent spilling her cider. That voice, at least, she recognized. I wasn't thinking much of anything, Aki, she said, turning to face the dark-haired man. Akila Lee was an abstract impressionist who dabbled in surrealism when he was bored and who considered ragged t-shirts the height of fashion. Seeing him in a tuxedo was like seeing a clock melt. Just letting my mind wander. You look good. Only under protest, Aki responded, tugging at his bow tie with a momentary grimace. I thought we were past the point where society required that we kill ourselves to meet a standard of beauty. Society doesn't require it, publicity does, Theo pointed out. Aki yanked on the bow tie again. Potato, potato. If it's bothering you that much, get rid of it and go for the free-spirited artist look. I bet half the guests don't want to be dressed up either. No can do. Schechter made a point to tell me specifically about the dress code. Giving up on the bow tie, Aki tucked his hands into his pockets with a sigh. On the other hand, it means I get to be the Asian James Bond for an evening. Lee. Akila Lee. Sandy must have liked it. Aki's gaze flicked across the room, settling quickly on Sandra Navarro, a slim, dark-skinned woman in a flame-colored evening gown. I don't know. I didn't ask. Of course not. Theo finished her drink and set the glass down on one of the tables, from where it was instantly whisked away by a waiter. You're just a nice colleague with a healthy respect for her work, right? That got a scoff from Aki. So I'm taking it slow. Big freaking deal. And if we're going to be talking about awkward personal stuff, nice transition. Thank you. If we're going to be talking about awkward personal stuff, what about you? I keep expecting to come in the morning and find you sleeping under your desk. Hell, I'm surprised you even turned up to this. He raised an eyebrow at Theo. You need to have more fun. There's a flaw in your argument. 2 flaws, actually. She ticked them off on her fingers. 1, implying that I'm here voluntarily. 2, implying that forced socialization with my coworkers, not all of whom are as adorably weird as you, qualifies as fun. Still not an answer. Don't tell me you couldn't have weaseled out of this. Publicity. That one word was sufficient to sum up the whole situation, and Aki nodded knowingly. Who could fathom the mind of publicity? The art department of Chicago's Columbian Exposition Museum of Natural History often fell victim to the plans of Mariana K. Schechter, Ph.D., and her public relations team. The artists agreed that it wasn't fair. Members of the scholarly departments, the historians, anthropologists, and archaeologists, the preservation experts, and librarians rarely had to deal with Dr. Schechter. They made the discoveries and showcased the pieces of history that drew in the crowds. The art department, on the other hand, was responsible not only for gift shop fodder, banners, and murals, but also for the general aesthetics of the place, including that sticky and indeterminate requirement, child-friendly. Theo had frequently crossed swords with Dr. Schechter over what was and wasn't allowable in a public space. Unfortunately, publicity had won their last bout after a parents' group complained about the heavily armed and fearsome-looking Aztec warriors on the wall in the children's annex, and Theo had been forced to concede that publicity usually knew what it was doing. Still, why does publicity even want us here? Aki insisted. He was naturally inquisitive, especially when it came to things he didn't like having to do. They're fired up for treasures of the Middle Kingdom, up to the point of Egyptianizing the annual party. So when they invite the trustees and board members to a shindig, they trot out the entire Egyptology department, the ancient religions guys. I think I saw the cultural anthropology team leader buried in the hors d'oeuvres. And I saw that jackass Zimmer glaring at some old lady who was checking out the naked warrior bronze. But the people who design brochures? Brochures for the exhibit, Theo pointed out. She had to admit she was curious too, but after the Aztec warriors, she was trying not to rock the boat. And of course they've got Zimmer here. The patrons probably like seeing the head of security around. It tells them we're serious about protecting their investments. You mean publicity's serious now. If that collector doesn't get caught soon, they're going to have a collective heart attack. Theo shushed him. You know we're not supposed to talk about that. Didn't you get the memo? 4 times. I think security has it in for me. Aki tucked both his hands into his pockets. Come on, lighten up. If you really think there's anybody here who hasn't heard about that whole thing, you're delusional. The minute the papers gave the guy a name, I know, but I don't want to get fired. Do you? Theo hoped nobody had overheard them. The Columbian had its own specialized gossip networks, and talk flowed freely enough most times. But it was widely acknowledged that talking about the Midwest's recent spate of museum thefts was a bad career move. Nobody wanted the high-powered donors thinking the Columbian might lose the items they had helped it buy. Fortunately, she spotted a distraction. Sandra Navarro had been buttonholed by the head of the Margrave Foundation and was sending out subtle but clear signals for help. Theo nudged Aki. "Go talk to Sandy." Aki frowned. "What? Why?" "Trust me, go talk to her." Theo gave Aki a gentle push. "Be her artist in shining armor." It took Aki a moment to catch on, but when he did, he stepped up to the plate. Taking 2 champagne glasses from a passing waiter's tray, he hurried across the room and neatly inserted himself between Freddie Margrave and Sandra, offering each a glass. Bond indeed. The man could be smooth when he wanted to. Sandra's expression of relief was noticeable, though she changed it to a smile when Margrave looked her way. Judging by her expression, Margrave had been talking either golf or marital infidelity. Thankfully, there wasn't much time left for socializing. Within moments, an army of waiters appeared from the sidelines, carrying stacks of dishes and silverware. As the guests chatted and sipped their drinks, the waiters, moving with the trained precision that made it a spectacle worth watching, whisked fresh cloths and place settings onto the tables and transformed the scene from lounge to dining room. Place cards were set out, and a tantalizing aroma stole into the air. Dinner was about to be served. Now the circling groups took on a purposeful air. The board members and wealthiest donors moved towards the dais, while the hoi polloi casually found their place cards. The waiters melted into the shadows at the edge of the hall, to be replaced by wine stewards bearing drink lists and more champagne. Theo found her assigned spot. To her surprise, she was at one of the mid-level tables with a professor of art history, a prominent and wealthy modernist sculptor, and a name she vaguely recognized but couldn't place. Well, that explained it. Dr. Schechter always arranged these events as carefully as Caesar had managed his legions, and she wanted someone from the art department for this group. Aki and Sandra had been placed a few tables over with a group of dour-looking men in suits. Clearly, the doctor was deploying the charmers where they were needed the most. Taking a seat, Theo surveyed the people joining her. Professor Greg Applebaum from Culver was a tousle-haired blonde man who looked much less comfortable than Aki in his tuxedo and bow tie. The sculptor Sinai, one name only, was lounging in his chair, watching the gathering with alert eyes. Theo didn't know much about him, though she would have bet good money that that would change by the end of the evening. The third member of the group surprised her somewhat. He was tall, 6'2" at least, with deeply curved lips and neatly parted, graying black hair that reached to just past his earlobe. His brown eyes were slightly tilted, not quite almond-shaped, but near enough to be noticeable, and fringed with charcoal lashes. Faint lines in the corners of his eyes and in the creases by his fine-bridged nose completed the look. He could have been anywhere from an overstressed 35 to a carefree 50. The thing that drew Theo's gaze, though, was his skin. It was a coffee color and should have had a touch of copper in the yellow-tinted light of the table's alcohol lamp, but instead there was a soft blue-gray undertone she had never seen before. It was as if the normal red notes had been washed out and replaced with indigo. If I painted him, Theo thought, I'd begin with purple ochre. Not a color that normally cropped up in her life portraits. She rubbed her thumb against her folded knuckles, wishing for a pencil. The man turned and caught Theo's stare eye to eye. Awkward. She felt her cheeks warm and instinctively lowered her head, trying to make herself unobtrusive. It didn't work. "I'm sorry, I don't think we've met," the man said, holding out one broad hand. "I'm Seth Adler." Nice to meet you. Mr. Adler," Theo said, trying to maintain her composure. The words came out rushed. "I'm Theodora Speer. I'm one of the artists here at the Columbian." Seth Adler's eyebrows rose at her first name, but he smiled and didn't comment on it. The hand that Theo shook was hard and strong, with square, blunted fingernails and calluses discoloring the tips of the fingers. They were old and thick, their shade lighter than the rest of his skin. Purple ochre, Theo agreed with herself, but desaturated. Faint warm tones, blended and layered. Cadmium yellow, but never enough to hide the blues underneath. It's a pleasure to meet you, Miss Speer. I've always admired what the artists here do for the museum. Had he? The name was familiar, but Theo still couldn't place it. The man didn't seem to be a professor, and the way he talked made her doubt he was another painter or sculptor. A banker or lawyer, then, likely one with an affection for hiking or extreme sports, judging by the calluses and muscled shoulders. Maybe his name was on one of the donor plaques in the lobby. It would explain the familiarity. Well, I'm glad to hear it, she said, trying to strike the right note between formal and friendly. Her words were coming more clearly now, which was a relief. We're mostly here to help put it together. The history and science are what's really important. Never underestimate the role of the artist, Professor Applebaum interjected, with the fervor of an academic dog seizing a favorite intellectual bone. The ultimate expression of a society's cultural values, and criticism of same, can be found in the artistic expression of everyday pursuits. Sinai yawned. It sounds boring to me. It doesn't take much talent to see things that are already there, after all. Not the kind of thing an artist should do. No offense intended, he added, nodding to Theo. I'd say I do the same thing you do, Mr. Sinai, she said as mildly as she could. Now her face was warming for a completely different reason. We both make things to express an idea or an image, and we get paid for it. I'd say the difference is that you probably make 7 times what I do, is that you work to your own schedule. Art is worthless unless it says something new, Sinai responded. His tone was as mild as Theo's, but she guessed that he wasn't nearly as ruffled as she was. He had the air of someone who was speaking from certainty. "Afraid we'll have to agree to disagree," Theo said as a waiter approached their table with the wine list. Sinai was well known, both as a painter and a sculptor, and Theo had seen and admired his installations, but that didn't mean she had to enjoy arguing with him about whether her own work actually counted as art. Instead of continuing that line of conversation, she took the wine list and let the talk carry on without her. The 3 men provided an interesting study. Sinai was at ease with the waiter and his companions, ordering easily, while Applebaum's politeness couldn't quite conceal his awkwardness when he tried to tip the waiter. Artist and art historian, somehow opposites. The 3rd man didn't fit with either. The relative ease of his manner was at odds with the lines of his form. His shoulders and back were held stiffly, as if he were afraid of being caught doing something he shouldn't. She wondered if she was imagining it, but when she followed the line and silhouette of his broad form, watching the way the shapes shifted as he moved, she realized she was right. It wasn't so much how he moved as how he didn't. Sinai's shoulders were relaxed. Applebaum's pulled forward slightly, as if he were trying to duck into himself. Mr. Adler was tense and still. The waiter turned to Theo, distracting her from her thoughts. "Your choice, ma'am?" "Just water, I think," she said, handing the list back to him and mentally thanking the universe for the intervention. Being caught staring again wasn't going to make a good impression on the patrons. "I have to work later, and I don't want to push my luck." "And for you, sir?" the waiter continued. Mr. Adler had barely glanced at the list. "The Arras Blanc," he said. "You have to work later?" It took Theo a moment to realize that the question was directed at her. He'd changed gears so quickly. "Well, I don't have to," she said, flicking a stray wisp of blonde hair behind one ear to cover her confusion. "But I want to. We're planning the main mural for Treasures of the Middle Kingdom, and I'm sure you know how big projects go. The minute I turn my back, I think of something I should have done instead." "Treasures of the Middle Kingdom," Mr. Adler repeated slowly. "The artifacts are from the 11th and 12th dynasties, I believe. It opens at the end of December, doesn't it?" "And it has the mummy?" Professor Applebaum interjected. There was a genuine smile on his face, and Theo couldn't help smiling back more widely this time. The man was clearly an enthusiast. The tubercular specimen with the anachronistic burial? You'll have to talk to the Egyptologist about the details, Professor, Theo said. I just paint them. Not that she hadn't studied every scrap of information she could get her hands on about the planned exhibition, or about Egypt in general. Theo always had time for a culture that equated images with magic. But yes, the mummy and its funeral goods. It's one of the most unusual things we've ever done, and definitely one of the biggest. Practically every department we've got is involved somehow. What's so special about this mummy? Sinai said. You've got whole rooms full of mummies in the other exhibits. Was this one a king? They don't know what it was, the professor cut in, his hands flat on the table as he leaned forward in his excitement. Nothing about it suggests royalty, but it was buried with thousands and thousands of ushebtis, the little figurines meant to serve the gods in the next world. It's the largest ushebti cache discovered ever. A very rich burial in a very small tomb with a very sick mummy. That drew raised eyebrows from Sinai. Ah, he said. There's a story here, isn't there? Any chance of a curse? Adler said. There was a touch of dry humor in his voice. That's usually what stories like this are about. No curse that we know of, Theo said. She knew plenty about the Shabti statuettes and their mysterious inscriptions, but she wasn't sure how interested the whole tableful of donors was in Egyptian minutiae. Applebaum was clearly into it, because he described them using the academic ushebti rather than the everyday Shabti. But the other two might be bored stiff by the topic. She settled for middle ground. But it's a definite deviation from the historical record, and that's almost as good. Add that to one of the best-preserved 12th dynasty mummies discovered in a long time, and, well, everyone's very excited about the possibilities. Mr. Adler relaxed as conversation began to flow, but that didn't mean much. Something about his lines bothered her. The tension in his shoulders and back, the odd angles of his nose and cheekbones. He had interesting lines, that was for sure, and his palette begged for a portrait in oil pastels. Once, she glanced up from the table to see a familiar figure standing at the edge of the hall. Mark Zimmer, the new head of security. A lean man in his late 30s or early 40s, with striking red hair and a tendency to stare at people as if he were trying to x-ray them. He'd gotten a reputation for anal retentive efficiency, but nobody complained too much about his strictness when he was around to hear it. With a museum thief making headlines, especially one flashy enough to get himself a colorful nickname, increased security was a necessity. Zimmer didn't look happy, which hardly surprised Theo. The donors' party always concluded with a behind-the-scenes tour of the museum's workshops, and having several dozen unvetted persons prowling around and poking at things was probably high on his list of worst-case scenarios. As she watched, he swept his gaze toward her table. She could almost see the wheels turning as he ticked off the people. Applebaum, not a threat. Sinai, not a threat. Her, cleared. Adler, possibly suspicious? He moved on. Apparently, Adler hadn't pinged his radar too much, though Theo would bet Zimmer to be coming back their way soon enough. Theo saw him twice more during the second and third courses. She wondered vaguely if he was going to eat, but her attention was diverted by Sinai and Applebaum starting a loud argument about disease in art. By the time the dessert plates were taken away, she hadn't gotten them to agree, but she had at least persuaded Applebaum not to shout. Nobody wanted to hear about gout over their ganache. At that moment, a murmur of conversation rippled through the room, and heads automatically turned. On the dais, a middle-aged man stepped up to the microphone, a smile on his sharp face. As near as he ever got to a smile, anyway. Dr. Wayne Van Allen, curator of the Columbian's Egyptology department, and the man whose pet exhibit was keeping Theo's and Aki's teams busy. The museum staff could guess the content of his prepared remarks. Welcome, glad you could make it, here's what we're planning to do in the next year, please give us more money. Still, Theo lent half an ear. It wouldn't make a good impression to be seen not paying attention. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, he said. His voice was flat and soft, though he seemed to be making an effort to sound lively. Theo kept her head aimed in Dr. Van Allen's direction, watching the movement of her table-mates in her peripheral vision. "We're gratified to see so many of you," the curator went on, "especially since this coming year is going to bring us a lot of surprises. Thanks to your generosity and the hard work of our museum staff, we'll soon be ready to display a unique set of treasures, artifacts from a period of Egyptian history that public perception often overlooks." As Dr. Van Allen continued, sketching out their plans for the exhibition and giving the donors some background on the 11th and 12th dynasties, Theo took the opportunity to sneak a few more peeks around. Though he affected a pose of bored detachment, Sinai was definitely listening. The idea of the lost periods of history seemed to intrigue him more than he would let on. Professor Applebaum, on the other hand, had tuned out, and Theo guessed that he was growing tired. Being talked to, or at, seemed less to his taste than an active conversation, or argument. Out of the corner of her eye, she could see Aki and Sandra at their table, their heads close together, as Aki sketched something on the tablecloth. Something flickered to her right, a glint of gold moving sideways, and too quickly to be the ripple of a banner. Theo turned her head slightly and met the eyes of Mr. Adler. He had taken out a pocket watch. Yes, a real pocket watch. The kind of old-fashioned affectation that the bankers and lawyers loved, and was checking the time as discreetly as he could. When Theo caught his gaze, he gave her a small smile and flicked his eyes toward Dr. Van Allen. She smiled a little herself as she understood. Like Professor Applebaum, he didn't enjoy being talked at, but he was trying to be more discreet than simply zoning out in his seat. Including a complete reconstruction of the burial chamber. This drew murmurs of approval from the donors, and Dr. Van Allen inclined his head to the room at large. While the focus of the exhibition is the treasures of the period, we are honored to be able to exhibit the mummy of Tomb THS2 as an integral part of the story. The so-called leper mummy, a man who lived with a terrible disease 4,000 years before he had a prayer of understanding it, and who was buried under very unusual circumstances. We look forward to sharing with you what this ancient artifact has to teach us. And now for the final event of the evening. On the back of your place cards, you will find a group number. Each group will be personally escorted around the museum, behind the scenes, for a first-hand tour of the most important and secretive parts of our work. Please don't hesitate to ask your guides about anything that interests you. The Columbian is proud to host all of you who have made our efforts here possible. Theo breathed easier after she turned over her place card and confirmed that it was blank. The donors would have been placed in groups, but someone might have failed to turn up and left her guiding one of the tours. Aki and Sandra, along with half a dozen other museum employees, were waving and calling out congenially to the people who had been assigned to them. Theo envied them their ease, not their job. Not when she still had a mural to finish planning. As people began to rise and find their groups, she nodded to the fellow members of Table 5 and climbed to her feet. She wobbled on her heels but didn't fall. "From the escape attempt, I take it you're not leading a group?" Adler said dryly. "No fool, you." "Be nice to the guests. Don't make the Columbian look bad. Relax." "I'm just part of the team," Theo said, lifting the hem of her dress to prevent stepping on it. "Damn shoes. There are so many talented people here already that I couldn't add anything to a tour tonight. You're in group 6? He nodded. "That's probably Aki's group. He's the painter I mentioned earlier. Incredibly talented, and not even 30 either. He'll be able to tell you so much more than I could." Sinai was saying something to Professor Applebaum, and she took the opportunity to slip out while they were distracted. As for Mr. Adler, it would probably be better if she didn't get caught staring again. He would be looked after. Dr. Schechter's genius for social arrangements would see to that. And Theo, having done her duty, could escape with a clean conscience.